I've been collecting antique cookbooks almost as long as I've been cooking. Even as a starving university student, I couldn't resist them. I love their smell and their feel. I love their language, their typefaces, and illustrations. The recipes for things I've never tasted or even heard of, and for dishes I've only read about. But I don't only read my old cookbooks, I use them. And my favorite by far is this one. Eliza Acton's Modern Cookery for Private Families, first published in 1845. I don't have an original printing of Mrs Acton yet, but I've consulted this excellent modern reprint again and again and almost never been disappointed. Mrs Acton's recipes are clear, sensible, and straightforward, and the results are delicious. In her own time, Mrs Acton was so highly regarded that Mrs Beeton paid her the compliment of stealing 150 recipes from Modern Cookery to put into household management. This year, for no good reason whatever, I decided it was time to tackle something I've never made, and in fact that I've only tasted once: a Christmas pudding. I had very little idea of how to go about it, but I knew that Mrs Acton would guide me safely to the finish. And how did it go? Let me show you, from the preparation to the plate, and with the full recipe at the end of this video. First, there's the question of when should we begin? I had always thought that puddings, like fruitcakes, needed to be mixed weeks in advance, but Mrs Acton writes in her introduction, "It is thought better to mix these entirely, except the liquid portion of them, the day before they are boiled, and it is perhaps an advantage when they are of large size to do so, but it is not really necessary for small or common ones." All right then, on to the ingredients. You will need 3 ounces of flour, 3 ounces of nice fine breadcrumbs, 6 ounces of beef suet cut into small pieces, 6 ounces of raisins or my substitution, chopped figs, 6 ounces of dried currants, 2 small apples to give you about 4 ounces, 5 ounces of sugar, 2 ounces of candied orange peel, I made my own, a pinch of salt and a half teaspoon of nutmeg, a small wine glass of brandy, and 3 large eggs. Making a Christmas pudding isn't a delicate process. In fact, it's rather muscular, but organization is important. Before you begin mixing the batter, be sure every ingredient is measured and prepared. Peel, core, and chop your apples, gently whisk your eggs together, and make sure your suet, fruits, and candied peel are all cut to the size they need to be. Put each ingredient in its own dish and line them up next to the mixing bowl in order. Do this a day in advance if you like. Now, in a nice stout bowl, begin to mix the ingredients in the order that you see here. First flour, then breadcrumbs, and stir. I find it helps to stir between every addition. There goes the suet, chopped into pieces, and give it a good stir. Stirring as you add makes it easier to blend everything properly. In go the figs that I chose instead of raisins because I don't like raisins. And they get a nice little stir. And then the apples, and stir. Sprinkle in the sugar, and stir. The candied peel, stir. Little bit of nutmeg, and stir. And a pinch of salt, and stir. And the brandy, and stir. And then the whisked eggs. And then give everything a nice, grand, final, thorough mix with your heavy wooden spoon to make sure that all is blended and distributed evenly as it ought to be. Then we prepare the mold and take about 2 tablespoonfuls of softened butter and use my clean bare hands to thickly, generously butter the entire inside of the mold. I know some people like to use a paper towel to do this, but I find it works best and fastest to just use my bare hands and work thoroughly until the entire inside of the mold is nicely coated with butter. And we begin to fill the buttered mold, big heaping spoonfuls of batter, and do not press them down. I sort of gently pat them into shape, but I don't want to compress the filling. I don't want to make the pudding heavier than it needs to be. And miraculously, Mrs. Acton's recipe fit perfectly into my 6-cup mold, leaving space there below the rim because this is going to expand if all goes well. Now, to help seal it up, a piece of thickly buttered wax paper, or you can use parchment, set buttered side down over the opening of the mold. Press it down a bit. Good. On goes the lid. Use the kitchen scissors to quickly trim away the excess and close the latches. Good to go. Before you begin making a pudding, be sure you have the right-sized pot. It must be at least deep enough to bring water up to, but not over the rim of the pudding. And ideally, you'll be able to fit a lid on, but hey, you cook with what you got. To keep my mold from resting directly on the bottom of the pot and possibly overcooking, I give it a cushion of folded cheesecloth, and then in goes the mold. Be careful of the hot water. There we go. Lid goes on. And now boil for 3.5 hours, taking care that you replenish the water as it evaporates and never let the water stop boiling. Then, at the appointed time, we very carefully remove the pudding and set it aside to cool down. It's going to take a while to cool. I was astounded to see how the batter had transformed and risen, and it smelled like heaven. Now, you're going to be very excited, but you've got to let the pudding cool at this point for at least a good 20 or 30 minutes. When, and only when it's cool enough to handle, invert it onto a serving platter, tap gently, and lift the mold away. I did it. I did it. I did it. I made a Christmas pudding. It looks like a Christmas pudding. It looks like a Christmas pudding in A Christmas Carol, or in a picture of a Christmas pudding. I'm so excited I have to pee. For a flaming pudding, pour on a small ladleful of brandy and carefully set it ablaze and watch it go. Lower the lights, gather people safely around you. And the amount of flame that you'll get, you see my display here is rather modest, is going to depend in part on the spirits that you pour over your pudding. It can burn for a while, so do take care not to attack it too soon. Serve your pudding with a sauce. I chose to use Mrs. Acton's own recipe for a wine sauce, and it's delicious. I've put the recipe at the end of the video. Ideally, I would have waited for the pudding to be completely cool before flaming and slicing and eating, but even a warm, messy slice is delicious. Use the good china and silver if you got it. And there it is, my first Christmas pudding. But it won't be my last. Turns out, stuff is delicious if you make it yourself and listen to Mrs. Acton. In this segment, I give you the recipe for the pudding and also the recipe for Mrs. Acton's wine sauce, so that you can screen capture them, copy them down, whatever you like. I hope you'll try the pudding. I'm really glad that I did. Happy holidays to you, wherever you are. Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to my channel so you'll be the first to know about future episodes. Click like or leave me a comment to let me know your thoughts. And if you really, really liked what you saw, check out my Patreon campaign, where my patrons enjoy exclusive access to downloads, live streams, and other bonus material every week.